This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it's time for Heart Mojo with Melinda Smith. And Melinda, this is a three-parter.
It is. I'm so excited. We didn't do a two-parter, let alone a three-parter. Look at us.
Yeah.
I'm
Just
honored.
just going right by the twos to the threes.
Right.
And even if we finish up today, I suspect we won't. So at some point, we're definitely going to have you back for
Oh,
sure.
thanks. I would love to come back.
So for those of you who've been in this series, this is Kim Langley, and she wrote this wonderful book called Send My Roots Rain. And we've been talking about grief, but today we've hit resilience, right?
Yes,
That's where we're going to start today.
it
And
is.
boy, do I need that. I haven't done a video for many, I'm not talking podcast, a video for a
Mhm.
long time on my social media. And I finally posted one
Good.
because a lot's been going on. So this is going to fall right into what I need as we
Yes.
move forward. So
Well,
take
we
it
all
away.
need it. Just because I teach it doesn't mean I don't need it too, you
Mhm.
know? And I think we're at the pandemic wall and we're all eager for spring. And then we read about how other countries already have had their lives back for months. We're like,
Mhm.
grrr, bring it on. So I thought I would talk to you a little bit today about the connection between happiness and resilience. And I got interested in this years ago because I think we said in the first interview that the center of my corporate training is emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
And from that, I started to follow the research on the science of happiness and the science of optimism because they are both part of EI, as we call it. And then I actually started teaching that more than EI because, I think it's needed. Everybody recognizes that their employees need it. And so when I always start that workshop with a quote that I'm going to start us off with too, because of course we don't always feel
Oh no.
resilient. We would all like to be. I wish I could create a resilience magic wand, right?
Right.
Right.
So the quote is from Loretta Lynn, a person of a great sense and groundedness. And she said, sometimes it's like you're a big pie. You have to imagine her sweet accent saying this, setting on the table, and everybody runs up and gets their piece of you. And when it's over, the plate's empty. So,
True.
Very
how
much
many of
so.
us feel like that? And the
Absolutely.
millennials have done a great job capturing this in their notion that I'm adulting hard, or I hate it when I have to adult like today.
Mhm.
So it's not, it's everybody's up against this. So one of the big things I think, actually for my own life, I only have my own experience. The biggest thing has been to cultivate a growth mindset. And I imagine you've probably had other speakers talk about growth mindset. Have
Yeah, a little
you,
bit.
Melinda? Okay. So um, the big guru behind growth mindset research is Carol Dweck, Dweck. And some of your listeners might enjoy watching her on YouTube or reading articles that she's written. The whole thing is that no matter what happens to you, of course, you feel your feelings. You might have to grieve or mourn or, shake your fist at the sky for a little while. But, you know, don't stay stuck there. Say to yourself, how can I make this the best problem I ever had? And that has been so important to me. I'm going to say it again. How can I make this the best problem I ever had? When I first heard that, I was like, what? Because the family I grew up in, that was not really the attitude. I mean, there was plenty of love, but not a lot of skill for how to reframe, the various travesties in life. But the idea of a growth mindset, here's one of the things she said. She said, I heard about a high school in Chicago where if students didn't pass a course, they got the grade not yet. Now, some of your listeners are like, oh, what is that? That's that, soft, everybody gets a blue ribbon stuff.
Mhm.
But actually, it isn't. What her research shows is that if you always leave it open, that growth continues to be possible, both kids and adults do better. So giving somebody an F, the idea was to motivate them. I failed. I don't want to fail again. But in fact, sometimes people can get into a pattern of failure. I mean, we see this with addictions. We see this with multiple failed marriages. We see this with people who can't keep a friend. And of course, many of us experienced it in school. We didn't do as well as we wanted to sometimes. And so the reason this school adopted the not yet idea was that they wanted the students to understand that you're always on a learning curve, and not yet gives you a path into the future. So one of the things I try to remember to say to myself is, say I'm impatient, and say I've just been impatient with somebody I love, because we always dump that on the people who are the safest, which is so nice of us. But afterwards, when I'm processing that, I can either beat myself up and say, I am such a jackass, or, why did I do that? Or, they're going to hate me now. Or I can say, that was a really misguided response, not the one I wanted to make, and remind myself a lot of my mother right there, or my dad, or my whoever, how we all swore, I'll never say that. And then it comes off our lips. But instead, once we're willing to admit that we made a not great choice, then we can say, so I have not yet learned how to curb my impatience in every situation. But anybody who's trying has probably already made some progress with their impatience. And they're going to make a lot more progress with their impatience if they not yet, instead of beating themselves up. Because who is motivated to do better when you feel like garbage? Right? And yet that's what so many of us do. We make ourselves feel like garbage, and then we're like, I don't know why I'm not motivated to do better. So I'll stop there for a second, and you can
Well, that's the same
respond.
concept of what you were talking about with the grades. I mean, basically saying you did a horrible job, oh my God, you get an F.
Right.
Or whatever it might be, whether it's in a sports arena or music or anything like that,
Yes.
that's not necessarily going to motivate you to do better.
No.
It actually may depress you,
Right.
and you're not able to move forward.
Right. And people tend to give up if they feel like there's no growth potential here. Now, I'm not one of those people who thinks that everybody can do everything. And I did say to my own kids, I never said to my own kids, you can be anything you want. I actually think that's a little bit of a mistake, kind of a setup, because when you get out in life, you can't be anything you want. I mean, I'm terrible at math. I can't be an astronaut. I can't be a physicist, we all have certain talents. So I might try out for the basketball team and be terrible at it, and try for a while, and then finally decide, this isn't my thing. I think maybe I should switch to volleyball or take piano lessons. Or so, there's a realism to this. It's not like I can, the sky's the limit.
Right.
But no matter what you want to get better at, you can usually get somewhat better at it. So that's actually a huge piece of resilience. So when my parents were failing physically, and my mom was failing mentally, and it was a lot, and anyone who's taken care of a sick child or a person with a disability or an elder knows exactly what I'm talking about. I used to get impatient. I would think, why don't they listen to me? Why don't we have a better situation here? How can I keep them safe? They'll never stop seeing me as their child. I'm 60 years old. And they're like, oh, when you get to be our age, So there are lots of frustrations. But it was also very much a growth mindset, that opportunity, So on my bad days, I was just like, Arr. But on my good days, I was like, what can I be learning from this? At the very least, I now have so much empathy for people who are caregivers that I couldn't possibly have had before. So you can turn toward anger and frustration and emphasize that, or you can let your pain teach you and unite you with all those who are also experiencing that.
Right. So so we've talked about kind of the kid and the motivation. We talked about being a caregiver and patience with our parents. What do you do with your relationships, like your partner relationships? How would you work that in there?
Well, I mean, one of the big things I think is to try to pick somebody who is living an examined life. That when I coach younger people, and they're in discernment about, should I partner with this guy or this woman, I usually ask them a couple questions like, do they run from conflict, or do they have some conflict management skills? You don't have to share every value, but it really helps if you share some core values. Is this a person who's oriented toward growth? Do they know when they need help? Those are some of the really basic guidelines for choosing a partner,
Mm-hmm.
I would say, because if you hook up with somebody who can't grow, is never wrong, and it's never them, it's always you or that guy at work or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
That's tough. Now, having said that, I picked a guy who thinks, and I'm really glad I did. And we're still married. And actually, this was very sweet. I sent him an article today on something I was reading about how brains work, and he was a teacher, so that is a great thing for us because we were both in education. He texted me back, thanks for the article. You're still interesting after all these years.
That was nice.
That's why I married this guy, because I'm certainly not beautiful anymore, and I'm not
Yes, you are.
skinny anymore, and not a lot of the things that you pick a partner for when you're a sweet young thing. But I hope I'm still interesting, So, when people say pick somebody who makes you laugh, that's not bad advice, as long as the way they make you laugh isn't,
Right.
to put a lampshade on their head in a drunken stupor. That gets old. And then in
So,
terms of resilience in relationships, once you've made your commitments, I think, honestly, I think knowledge is power. I mean, I did a lot of reading about like how to argue productively. And when we were young, 1,000 years ago, one of the values we didn't share was how to handle money. And that's almost like a Murphy's Law. The joke of the universe on each of us is that you always seem to become committed to somebody who has some huge area of disagreement with you, like politics or money.
mhm.
And we had many discussions, and I mean, we weren't doing anything really dumb, but we didn't have similar goals for how to save and spend. So, I think it's important to know when you're at the limits of your knowledge. So we got tapes. This is how long ago this was, from the library, made by a couple's financial counselor. And we committed to listening to them in our tape decks in our car. This is hilarious.
was good.
Feel free to laugh. And we both listened to them. And then we made a series of dates where for the first half hour, Bill would set his watch to beep. This was before cell phones, of course. And so for the first half hour, we would talk about what we were learning in these tapes. And we couldn't fight. We had to act like grown-ups. That was one of the ground rules. We could agree to disagree. And like, what are we learning? And actually, I'm telling you, that was one of the best things we ever did, because we were arguing in part because of ignorance. After I learned a little bit about what money means to people, I realized I had married a guy for whom money meant safety. So
Mhm.
he really wanted to save every penny. He was pretty frugal. And I came from a family where money meant freedom and fun. So, my poor mom always had a balance on her credit cards and took a vacation every year, whether she could afford it or not.
But
And
there's some point to that you're living your life. I mean, I know this is kind of off of what we're talking about, but for the person who lives life that way, as long as they're not harming anybody or harming their family, so you carry a little debt. So you take the
yes,
vacation. Life is only so long, right?
I actually agree with that. And actually, you bring up well, let me finish this point, and then I'm going to speak to some really
Okay.
good. You just summarized some research right there, Melinda. So the problem, of course, is then you have to balance, like, let's have fun, or let's live, and let's prepare for the future. And so in the case of my parents, they were so busy having fun that when they came to their old age, they had almost nothing put aside for them. And that was an enormous stress once my
Yes,
mother
very
got
much.
Alzheimer's, because as most of your listeners know, that
Very
care,
expensive.
right. And they didn't have anything. They had even done a reverse mortgage on their house. They're both gone now, so I could tell you this. They won't be embarrassed, and maybe somebody else can learn from it. So their poor daughter was like, oh, What,
Right.
how am I going to take care of these guys? It all worked out in the end, but I had many sleepless nights. So, extremes, avoid extremes. Now, what
Mhm.
you're saying though about living a life, carrying a little debt, or taking the vacation while you're still young enough to hike and so on, that's well researched. That people have done research on happiness to see what kinds of things produce the most lasting happiness. And of course, there's various ways that people do things. So they shop, they purchase stuff, and then what the research shows is the thing that contributes most to lasting happiness is when you put your money toward experiences. So in like with your grandkids or your kids or even yourself. So when I was teaching stress management a lot, I would challenge people to look at their budget and say, what percentage of this budget do you spend on your own, like, kind of growth? Not just makeup or cigars or haircuts or clothes, because that's what we get a lot of messages from our marketing culture that
Mhm.
your teeth aren't white enough, so you should spend money on whiter teeth and then you'll be happier. And hopefully we all figure out at some point that that message is not coming for our benefit, but for the benefit of those who are selling teeth whitening products.
Right.
Right. But it takes some people a long time to figure it out. Some people never figure it out. And so they keep pursuing the next big thing, the new wonderful flat screen TV with stereo sound, a new car every 3 years, and then they get that thing. And then there's this phenomenon, well researched, called the hedonic treadmill. And all that means is hedonism is related to hedonic. And all that means is you get a new car, and the research shows you're pretty excited about it every time you get in it for about 6 months. But by the time the new car smell has worn off, you're used to it. And that's the hedonic treadmill, because now you need something else to look forward to, a new thing to buy, etc. And that does not produce lasting happiness. Whereas when I would challenge my folks to think of what they spend themselves on, I would say, how many like self-help books do you buy, or do you take yoga, or do you spend money on a retreat, or give money away and volunteer at this place that you give money away? Because giving money away actually is very well researched as
Mhm.
something that makes people happy. So there's a really good book called The Myths, MYTHS, Myths of Happiness. And it summarizes all this research, talking about what people think will lift their spirits and what actually produces a more long-lasting
Well,
effect.
wouldn't you be able to just create an experience without spending the money? I mean, I grew up with
Yes,
very little money.
yes,
So I'm going to give you a quick example. We used to
please
get in the
do.
car,
Yeah,
and because my mom was single mom, right, with two young
mine too.
kids, and we
Mm-hmm.
would drive around and look at the Christmas lights and look at the
Yes,
houses and say, oh, one day maybe we'd like a house like that, or what's your favorite house?
yes,
Those are all good memories for me. We spent
yes,
nothing but a little gas money to drive around the neighborhood.
yes,
But little things like that made all the difference. Taking a hike in the woods didn't cost
yes.
us anything but to go there, or pick up Kentucky Fried Chicken and sit in the park
Right.
and eat
And that
that
was
versus
fun.
going to a restaurant. Now, I
Right.
love going out for fine dining, I must
Yes, of
admit.
course.
I do. But there's something to be said for those small moments.
I could not agree more. And sadly, I think we don't get much support in doing that because that doesn't line anybody's pockets.
Right.
It's
But I
a
know when my kids were young, we used to throw peanut butter in a loaf of bread and jelly, and I always hid because otherwise they'd have drunk it, a thing of pop or iced tea or something. And we just jump in the car on a nice day after work when I got home from work and have a picnic.
Right.
Now that's not the kind of picnic my grandma would have put together. She'd have been spending the whole day making macaroni salad and
Right.
wrapping up beautiful sandwiches in wax paper and slicing tomatoes. But we loved it.
Right.
And like you said, it cost nothing. So
but I think
that is a good thing to remember. Yes.
we're captivated by the ads. I mean,
Yes.
you can't get away from them. And I know we didn't have a lot when Alex was younger, and yet we lived in Brecksville amongst a group of people that their kids were getting everything that they wanted.
Yes.
And Alex had to earn it.
Yes.
And he would come home and he'd say, well, why can't I have it?
Yes.
And you don't want to say to a 5-year-old and 8-year-old, hey, mom and dad don't have the money for it.
Yeah.
But we started explaining to him that you had to save up for certain things. And
Yes.
that's how I was brought up. Now, my
Yes.
husband, anytime he wanted anything, his parents bought it for him.
Mm.
But as an adult, when he couldn't afford it, he had to learn too, what
Yes.
can I do to be happy? And those were the things we did. We went for walks.
Yes.
We took time out and we played, t-ball with our son in the backyard. We
Sure.
made sure that we made a big deal of it.
Yeah.
And now that I look back, those were the most fun times that we all had together.
I
Even if you
couldn't
take
agree
a
more.
vacation, you don't have to go all out on it. So
Yes.
you spend the money to get there, but there's nothing wrong with having pizza while you're at the beach
Yes.
versus going out every night, every night, every night. It's about that time together.
Exactly.
To look for that. It's very interesting how when people grow up. So I have a friend that the only way anything was important was to spend money.
Yeah.
It wasn't important if you didn't spend money on it. It
I
was
get
just a
it.
simple nothing thing. So
Right.
those were the only moments that they looked forward to.
I know. And that's
And they
hard,
missed
isn't it?
all these other things along the way.
I know. And we also are in a culture where we kind of make fun of people who have a coupon or who go when it's less expensive. And that's so arrogant of us as a culture, I think, to do that because what it costs is not what makes it valuable. But it's hard to
Right.
persuade people who have been raised differently that that's the case. And this may be one of the reasons that there's a world happiness measurement, if you can believe it. And so happiness research has actually been conducted in every country in the world now. And there's a ranking that comes out every year. And America has never been in the top 20. So here we are, we all have all this stuff. Or
Mhm.
we don't all have all this stuff. That's another issue,
That's
like
another
the
reason. Yeah.
imbalance of um, inequitable schooling and incomes and so on. But the countries that consistently have the greatest happiness tend to be those Scandinavian countries. They just keep switching places. One year one's 1 and next year it's 3 and then it moves up to 2 and then this one is 1 and so on.
Hmm.
And the characteristics that they share, and this might annoy some listeners, but I'm sorry, this is the research, is that they have a strong social kind of underpinning. There's a lot of them have a guaranteed kind of minimum income. The minimum wage is, you can live on it.
So they're not
There's
worrying.
a lot less expensive college education, for example, and there's universal health insurance.
Right.
So those enormous stresses that rob people of vitality are not so enormous. Now, they don't have all the stuff we have either because they pay
Right.
really high taxes in order to get all that. But I guess for me at least, the proof is in the pudding. So when we talk about resilience as Americans, we really have to have resilience skills. And I always urge people in workshops to kind of make positive psychology your hobby. So there's a couple resources I'd like to share with your listeners, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. So there's a blog that is wonderful. It's called Barking Up the Wrong Tree. And it's written by Eric Barker. Get it? See what he did there? And he is so good and has such a huge following. He's kind of funny. But he takes all this really solid, evidence-based, data-driven psychological research, and then he writes it up for us average Joes and Josephines in a way that's very interesting and humorous. And when he collected his blog posts into a book, it was a bestseller before it was published. That's how many
Wow.
people ordered it. And so a book like that, or even just following his blog, bite-sized, learning these things in bite-sized chunks, helps you to focus on what's important, relationships, peacemaking, conflict management skills. And he'll write posts about, like the one I just sent to my husband, who texted me back with that sweet note, was on how to be mentally resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And so he interviewed a Navy SEAL, a couple psychologists, and I mean, it's just really, so there's always something for everybody there. Another place that your readers might enjoy is the Greater Good Science Center. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's taking science of what makes people happy and resilient and emotionally intelligent, and it's putting it out there in the form of quizzes and articles and online workshops for the greater good. So that's great stuff. And one time, when I was low, it was actually when I was caring for my parents, I gave myself an hour. I'm still on Facebook, but people might be on other social media. And I gave myself an hour to go through the kinds of pages that tell you these positive psychology tidbits. So I started to follow, very eclectic. I'm a Christian myself, but I started following a Buddhist page and a poetry page and a couple positive psychology pages and a couple happiness pages and a couple inspiring quotes pages and women in leadership. And I followed Brene Brown, and you get the idea,
Mm-hmm.
so. And
Eclectic.
now my Facebook feed is such a wonderful place to go.
Mm-hmm.
I almost never see pictures of people's lunch or, political, that makes me crazy, because I made these things come up first. There's a way you can
Mm-hmm.
set it so that you see
Right.
them first. And so I always feel like I'm surrounded by people that are, sort of fighting the good fight, and they have a growth mindset to bring us
Right.
back to where we started. So,
So what do you say to somebody who says, and I know a few people like this, oh, this stuff, it's just psychobabble,
yes,
mumbo jumbo, it doesn't work. You can't talk yourself into being happy. You can't read yourself into being happy.
yes.
So what would
What
you
do you
say to
say?
somebody like that?
I do occasionally get people like that in a workshop. Like one time, it's like a very funny story. I was giving a workshop to a group of accountants and financial advisors, and they were having this professional meeting at a winery. So maybe I should have said I was busy that day, but no. Okay, so I show up, and the topic they've picked is the science of optimism. And I deliberately call it the science of optimism because most of the material I'm drawing on, it represents 40 years of work by various gurus in the field. This is not somebody like writing motivational frou-frou in their basement, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And most people were very attentive and asking good questions, but there was this one guy who perhaps had a little bit more than he should have before I got there. And he starts, this is all, just like you said. And finally, I said, I don't let that stuff bother me because I'm there for the people that want to learn it. And
Right.
if he wants to argue, bless his heart. But I did finally say to him, so, sir, now that you've told us, how you disagree with a lot of this, may I ask you, if you had to describe yourself as an optimist or a pessimist, which would you choose? And the whole room erupted in laughter because they all knew this guy. He must have been a chronic grouch. And so, of course, he said, well, I'm a realist, but, point taken. I mean, let's just move on then. So back to what I said earlier, like when you're picking a partner, try to pick somebody who has a growth mindset so they don't just dismiss all this stuff
Mm-hmm.
because some people maybe have been burned, like there is some unhealthy optimism out there that's pretty much delusional. I think I mentioned that last time. And so some people latch onto that and say, see, this is all BS, but you can't paint it all with the same broad brush. You want to seek out that which is well researched and then at least consider it. One time I went to a workshop where it was on aging well, and the woman who was giving it was very accomplished, and she was in her 70s and had been a speaker for a long time. And somebody in the workshop said to her, well, I told my family, I'm 70 now. I can say whatever I want. I can do whatever I want. And the speaker was quiet for a minute, and she looked at her like with a certain amount of compassion in her eyes, which I really admired. And then she said, "And how's that working out for you?"
Absolutely.
Right? When's the last time one of your nieces or nephews got on the phone because they wanted to talk to you? You know, how's
Right.
that working out for you? So she then used that as a springboard to say, I mean, we can make choices to become surly or to
Right.
deny science or to say this is all garbage. But if we make those choices, there's going to be consequences for those choices. You
That's
know,
the big thing here. It is a choice. So
it
as
is.
you have a lot of positive things that pop up, and I have that as well on my social media, but because of the cancer base group that I
Yes.
spend time with, I get a lot of that too.
Yes.
And I've always tried to be positive through my treatment to others as well,
Yes.
to motivate them, not because the positivity will necessarily cure them.
Yes.
That's what you run against, like, oh, it's not going to cure the problem. No, it's probably not going to cure your problem, but
Right.
it certainly makes going through it a
Yes.
little easier. If you
Yes.
make the
A lot
choice to
easier,
be
I would say.
angry and, oh, surly and difficult, then it's going to be that much harder. Or
Of
you have a
course.
choice to try to be positive and look for whatever lesson comes out of it or a good piece to it. Or if nothing else, your experience might help somebody else
Yes.
and you
And
can
you
share
haven't
that.
alienated your whole support system. You know, it's hard for people to keep visiting or to be supportive, even in a serious illness, somebody who is miserable all the time.
Right.
So, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I have a friend who's a chaplain. Of course, she has these conversations all day, every day. And she said that one of her big jobs is to try and teach people the difference between hope and hope for a cure. I mean,
Hmm.
of course, you can hope for a cure.
Of course.
And if it becomes clear that no cure is forthcoming, then you don't give up hope. She talks to them about choosing a smaller hope.
Right.
There's always hope. How could you choose a smaller hope? Well, maybe I'm going to stop my chemo and go to Disney one more time with my grandkids. And that would be satisfying. Or
Right.
maybe I'm going to get myself into hospice early enough so that I can stop feeling anxious all the time about dying in pain. And
Right.
then if you do that, you've chosen a smaller hope and you've made your life so much better.
Well, I think you can do that with anything. I mean,
Absolutely.
if you look at like, for example, as you know, and Karen knows, I'm in the middle of moving. It was not my choice. They're selling
Yes.
the house,
Yeah.
and I was thrown from a new job into this move. And it's all a choice at how you look at it. In the beginning, I'm like, oh, God, how could this all happen to me all at once? I can't believe it. And
Right.
then now I'm kind of like, okay, there's going to be a freedom to this. There's something better. It's a choice to look at it differently. I could
Yes.
spend the time being angry. It only
Yes.
makes me more tired
Yes.
to try to get through the
Exactly.
process. And I think
Exactly.
that's true with every aspect of life, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, whether it's moving, whatever it might be. If you choose to look at it differently, it's
Yes.
going to be so much better.
Well,
Well,
we
that's
also
why that,
can't beat up
I'm
ourselves.
sorry, best problem I ever had changed my life. I mean, of course, you might be angry the first day, or you might have a little cry, or you might think, oh, the timing's terrible. But don't stay there. Go ahead, Karen. I'm
Well,
sorry.
we have to accept the fact that, you basically answered it. We're not going to be, it's, it doesn't help to be angry the whole time. Can you be angry on and off? Absolutely,
Of
because
course.
that's the only way to get it out. But if you are so miserable, you're making everybody else around you miserable and you're alienating yourself because you're telling yourself, hey, it can't get any better. Um,
Yes.
we went through something a couple weeks ago here where there was such tension in the house. And I finally sat down, my son and my husband, and I said, do you feel it? And they looked at
Mm-hmm.
me and said, what? And I said, do you feel the heaviness?
Mm-hmm.
And we all looked at each other and we said, so what are we going to do about it? And we sat there all of a sudden telling jokes. We've never done that before, but it took that heaviness away.
Hmm.
And there was nothing we could do about that heaviness. I mean, the problem that was there, it was going to be there no matter what,
Mm-hmm.
but we could work around it. And the fact that we did, it has made it so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
So Can other people do this? Yeah, they can, but they have to
Yeah.
want to. And that's
Right. I think
To
the
want
want
to.
to is the key.
It
Why
is.
would you wallow in it, get angrier about it? Okay, you don't like your situation, you don't like what's going on. You could choose hope. You could choose to look at it differently and say, okay, I don't like this, but now I'm going to work through this and see where it takes me.
Yes.
Something good will come out of it. I think it's all comes down to back to the choice. And
And I
choice, making right choices helps in your resilience.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes the right choice is what can I do, read, what class can I join, what yoga can I take or whatever to help myself be more resilient. So, so two things I'd like to speak about. One, I just not long ago talked to somebody who works with people who have chronic illnesses. And she was telling me that one of the things she has to do sometimes is coach people out of liking the secondary benefits of being sick all the time. Is
Hmm.
that something you guys are familiar with?
yes.
That was a new
Yep,
new idea to me.
I've had a son who was sick from the time he was born. And
Hmm.
even though he hates being sick, maybe now as an adult, he's learning to not like the secondary. But I
Yeah,
can definitely tell you, as a youngster, the ability to have more time to do things,
right,
the extra attention that you got
right.
wasn't a benefit.
The sympathy or the
Right,
pity or the slack cut.
right.
Yeah, and she said sometimes somebody will come and they'll say, I'm really ready to change my lifestyle and be as healthy as I can be. And she said after like 2 or 3 months, she'll say to them, you are not ready. Yo, yes, I am. I'm absolutely ready. No, you're not. You are in love with the way things are right now, and you're not yet ready to give that up for something better.
Do you
Isn't that
also think they
fascinating?
feel safe, as weird as that sounds, that negative situation, whether it be a health or whether it just be your attitude
Your
about
mindset.
whatever your mindset, that peace is a comfort level. Like
Yeah, you're
this,
used to it.
right? You know what to expect here,
Yeah,
but if you go here, you don't really know what to expect. So
yeah.
it's uncomfortable, even if the idea is to get healthy.
Yes. Would it be okay if I talk about a story, a little biblical story without
Sure.
being preachy? I don't intend to try and convert anybody to anything that I think you all know me well enough now to know I'm a great respecter of different people's beliefs. But one of the most interesting interpretations I ever heard of that situation in the New Testament where Jesus is preaching to all these people and then it's real crowded and people are standing outside and then suddenly people start opening up the roof, which was possible because they were more like a thatched situation than
Hmm.
you couldn't really take asphalt shingles off. And then they lower this paralyzed man down to the floor in front of him on a pallet. His friends do that. And so Jesus says to him, like, what do you want? I mean, that must have been pretty surprising. Here he is giving this speech, and then this guy comes down through the ceiling. And then he forgives his sins. But but what the person teaching us about this said is that we don't know what those sins were and what kind of sins could a person who couldn't get up off a pallet commit anyway. I mean, so don't get all caught up in the sin thing. He said, let's look at that psychologically and imagine that Jesus is looking into his heart and saying, do you want a different life? And when the man says yes, he believes him and he gives him a different life. So of course we'd all like miracles and they're not always available to all of us. But I had never thought about how I always thought about how surprised Jesus must have been or the people standing around him. I never thought about how frightening that must have been for the paralyzed man.
Right.
You can imagine his fans saying, "No, we're putting you down there. No, no, leave me alone. No, we're putting you down there. We heard this guy's got the right stuff." And it really was internal conversion as much as a physical healing. And so we
Well,
can all be converted over and over and over to more resilience. you
and
know
that's a big miracle,
hmm
but it's the small miracles that I
yes,
think add up, add up to something bigger. Like you said, he had to want to make that change. He had to want it. And that's
right.
true no matter what it is, whether it's small or whether it's something big.
Well, look in addictions. People really can't recover from addictions until they want to. The whole family can want them to. The spouse could be desperate for them. to stop drinking and so on, but until the person who is the addict makes up their mind to do it. So I love that story of the paralyzed man, because which is the bigger, what he said to us is, what's the bigger miracle, that the man could get up and walk, or that the man was ready to change? There's a quote, I end a lot of my workshops with this, and I don't have it in front of me, but it's something like, to say that happiness is a choice is a little bit too simple. Happiness is a choice, but it's also often a lot of choices, like the choice to know when I need to learn something new, the choice to get help, the choice to grow, the choice to adjust my attitude. And that's true even when, especially when, we don't feel like making that choice.
Mhm.
And I love that so much. I printed that out, hung it over my desk. And the quote is by a woman named Lori, Lori Duchenne. It's like Dushene. So if any of your listeners want to look it up, I'm sure if you just Google
I'm gonna
around
look
with
it up.
her name, you'll find it. It's really words worth living by.
Well, don't we all get to a certain age where we think that we've learned it all? Okay.
I hope not.
No, yeah, but I've seen it. Okay.
I have too.
I saw it in my grandparents. I saw it in my mother. I mean, when you brought up that comment, I'm at a certain age and I can say whatever I want. My mother
Yeah,
did it at her 95th birthday. She stood in
really.
front of everybody and said,
Yeah.
need you all to be quiet now because I'm 95 and I have the floor and I can say whatever I want. And we all laughed.
Yeah.
Um, but I think there is something as we get older that a lot of people believe, hey, I already know it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, this is who I am. And if you don't like me, then that's your problem.
Right.
I think we have to start teaching people at a younger age. You know
Y-
what? We have to keep evolving. We
Yes.
can't stop at an age and say, you know what? I've had enough.
I mean, we
No.
can,
Well,
but
Well,
then we might die alone,
well,
right?
that's just it. If you stop growing, you die.
right.
Whether you
Mhm.
physically die,
Yes.
emotionally die, your relationships die, your family relationships die, whatever it is,
Yes.
I think if you don't continue to grow and evolve and learn that there's more out there, then you die.
Absolutely.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I think um, there is some research that shows that some people become less flexible in their thinking as they get older. I think it's also sanctioned by society, the whole stereotype of old and grumpy.
Right.
But
Grumpy old men.
it's not inevitable that you will get old and grumpy. Even if you become frail, for example, you can still keep your sense of humor. Who are the people we admire the most? People who grow old with grace. One My spiritual director for many years, very straightforward, um, not always soft spoken, but beautiful human being. And she was in her 80s when she died, and she was luminous. Her face was very wrinkled. She had that kind of skin that gets real crepey.
Hmm.
And she used to bemoan that because she said, everybody treats me like I'm old. I can't help it. I got this skin. But she was feisty and funny and wise and just luminous. I don't know what other word to use. Like, she was full of wisdom and grace.
Well, I think she accepted her life. I mean, we talked about this on the last podcast about generations being angry,
Yeah.
right? Angry about aging. You've got a whole boomer population going, I'm supposed to still, be a supermodel. I'm supposed
Yes.
to be the,
I should look
and I'm
20 when
not.
I'm 60, right?
Right. You look at that and you think this is where I should be. So
Right.
you're angry. And if you're angry, it's hard for you to, be graceful. It's hard for
Yes.
you to be resilient because you're too busy being angry about your life, which
Right.
maybe those things you didn't get back to, not having
Yes.
enough things,
Right.
or the relationships you didn't get, or your body you didn't get. And so you're
Right.
angry and you
Well,
take
that
that
brings
all
us
the way to
back to
the end.
entitlement, and how entitled our culture is. Like, why should I get these things? People say, why did this happen to me? Everything happens to me. Why wouldn't it happen to you? You're no better
Right.
than anybody else. And as my mother-in-law, who is another wise woman, she'd say, nobody gets out of this alive.
Yeah.
So we should
Yeah.
stop pretending.
Getting old is not for, getting
Not
old is
for
not for the
wimps,
faint
my
of
mother
heart.
used to say. Yeah,
I mean,
it's
I
true.
think we lose something in all of this if we don't look at age as a privilege
Hmm.
and
Absolutely.
know that we can continue to learn and be accepting of who we are together.
Yes. And not let our brains fall into ruts, because brains do like to fall into ruts,
Well, sure.
Yes.
and if we don't actively try not to be that way, then yeah, maybe we will get boring and crotchety and
Well,
so
you're
on. But it's
creating that pathway, right? The brain and the
exactly,
body creates pathways of pain and how you behave and how you react. And why should that
right.
be any different with aging? And then how you accept or make the choices you make.
I agree. And I think for me too, I was not raised this way, but it has changed my life when I really beefed up my gratitude practice.
Absolutely.
And I have a feeling both of you women feel the same way. So even no matter how bad things are, there's always something to be hopeful about. There's always something to be grateful for. Sometimes you have to look, a little
Right.
harder, but there is always something. And so that's an orientation toward life that'll serve you until you take your last breath.
And you have to work at it. It's like anything else. It doesn't just happen. You have to
Yes.
really think about it. We all have bad days. I wake up and, I'm sore from moving and my back
Yes.
is killing me. But hey, I woke up today.
Yes, exactly.
5 years ago, I wasn't so sure I would wake up every day.
Right.
So I remember that. So you have to practice the attitude of gratitude, as they say.
Yes. It's like a muscle, don't you think?
Absolutely.
I wasn't all that good at it when I first realized that it could be a game changer for me. And I grew up, I grew up with some depressed people in my inner circle of family. And so I learned a lot of depressive self-talk and
Hmm.
speech, but I didn't, when I realized it finally, I didn't want to stay stuck there. And so I started reading about gratitude and, um, trying to kind of exercise that muscle. And boy, during the worst days of your life, it's like a life raft that you can grab onto, right?
That's where resilience comes from, really, if you think about it.
I think it's one of the key pieces to being
Absolutely.
resilient.
I can't believe it, but I think we're at the end of our time already. We just zoom right through this.
It's
So
always
you're
such
going
a
to have to
pleasure
come
to talk
back.
to you both.
Yeah.
There
Thank
won't
you.
be a part 4 immediately because you have some things going on, but we would love to have you back maybe in a couple of months and
Sure,
give everybody a little refresher, and
that would be
we'll
wonderful.
pick a topic. I'm sure by then, where will we be? May? People we'll see where we are with the shots, and we'll see,
Yes.
we might have some more things to discuss for them.
Live in hope.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Let's end with
Yeah.
that. We live in hope.
So I'm encouraging everybody to pick up your book. As you said in the beginning, it's
Oh,
not
thank
something you necessarily sit down and read all at once, but
you.
you can go through and pick up one of the poems. I tend to do that. I feel like, okay, today, what's the message that's going to come to me? So I open the page and that's the message for me today.
Oh, that's
So,
beautiful.
Great
That's really a
idea.
growth mindset. What is there for me? That's one of the reasons I put journaling opportunities in the book.
mhm.
There's a poem and then there's a reflection. The reflection is not, oh, Kim is so wise. The reflection is like, what can we take away? What comes up in you when you read this? And that's how we grow.
And that same passage could mean something on a different day,
Yes. Isn't
depending
that
where you
true?
are.
Yeah.
So anybody that would love to read this book, you can buy it on Amazon. I get it real quick. Didn't take me long to get it at all. And how else can they find you, Kim?
Well, I have if anybody wants training, I have a couple websites. KimLangley.net is my corporate and healthcare site, and Life Balance Enterprises, that's the name of my company. So it's lifebalanceenterprises.org, and that's where I do retreat work, and I lead poetry circles, and I do programs for women, and it's really fun. And
Okay.
one good thing if you're on Facebook is send me a Facebook invite, because anytime I teach a writing class, or, in April, I'm going to do 4-week mini retreat 4 Monday nights on Hildegard of Bingen. Now, some of you are going, oh boy, that doesn't sound like my cup of tea. But Hildegard of Bingen was such a, well, I can't use that word, but she was a bad
You could say
girl.
badass. You could say badass.
They-
Okay,
Because
she
we're
was a
badasses,
badass.
all three of
I
us.
love her so much. She was a medieval abbot who like took on the system, traveled in preaching, wrote a medicinal, wrote music, wrote a play. She did not let the life keep her down, and she had chronic headaches. I mean, she had plenty of challenges. Just one of the things we'll talk about, but
That's perfect for International Women's Day today, right?
yeah, that's
And
right. I
for the
forgot
month,
that today
Women's
was.
Month.
Yeah, so look on my Facebook page and you can get the information about.
And you're on
that if
LinkedIn
you're
as well,
interested.
which is how
I
we
am.
met.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
well,
thank you so
again.
much. It was such a
Always
pleasure, ladies.
pleasure.
Have a
Mhm.
great day. Take care.
Take
You
care.
too.
Bye bye now.
Talk
Bye,
soon.
everybody.
Bye. Thanks.